Happy Friday and welcome inside Mr. Small's Theater high on the hill here in Millvale. I am Matt Geica and you are watching and listening to The River's Edge. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com, live streaming on Facebook Live as well, and on our website, riversedgepgh.com/live. So many ways to access our programming, both in the moment and after the fact. We have my podcast page for this show accessible on the website. This show is called Geik's Got Game, and I am Matt Geica, your host. I'll be with you for the next hour as we take a lap around the sports world with topics relevant to, of course, the Pittsburgh area and things that you care about here. It is as close to a fantasy world as we can have in Pittsburgh because it's a Steelers playoff week. Everyone's talking about the game on Sunday, AFC divisional round matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars, with the added intrigue of the fact that the Jaguars came in here and spanked the Steelers back in early October. We'll get to the actual game later on in this program. In addition to some hockey talk, even though it was a bye week for the Penguins winning 2 games in a row before taking 5 days off per the NHL's mandate. This is the second year for a bye week, which is typically a football term. It's been a hockey term the last 2 years. Take it or leave it. Like it or lump it, that's the way it is. And so the Pens have stepped away from the rink. They'll get back to it this weekend with back-to-back games at PPG Paints Arena. But we will talk some hockey, even though we haven't had anything fresh over the past few days. And I say we because my featured guest for the show is Dan Kingerski of PittsburghHockeyNow.com. You can find him there. He hosts his own podcast as well, in addition to columnizing and reporting from both PPG Paints Arena and also from the comfort of his own home. Dan is definitely going to bring the opinion, as always. Good to talk with him, good to argue with him. I've collaborated with him on several projects, and he had a column that I think stirred some, at least part of the Pittsburgh hockey fandom with his proclamation that the NHL got it right by leaving Phil Kessel off the All-Star Game roster. At first, I disagreed, but then I started to come around, so we'll see where I stand in just a little bit when we welcome Dan onto the show. That's at approximately 10:20. Then later on in the program, much later, I'll kill another cliche. That's the usual order of operations here on Geik's Got Game. And this one crosses over to the real world, if you will. But it's about media trying to protect people from things they don't really need to be protected from, in my humble opinion. But to start, speaking of the media, I do speak on media topics quite a bit as I am part of said media, so I feel comfortable in doing so. With the NFL playoffs continuing on to their second week, and with the Steelers getting on the field, now every team that is involved in the playoffs will be active, as the Steelers and the Patriots and the Vikings and, I forget who else on the NFC side had the bye week, but this is when it really gets going. The divisional round, 4 games. All the top teams are included. And as you can imagine, the football talk and the football coverage is at a fever pitch over the course of the past several days. And that includes here in Pittsburgh, as everyone's getting fired up, not just for Steelers-Jaguars, a real chance for this team to advance to its second consecutive AFC Championship game. The Steelers appear to be the better team by far against Jacksonville in this matchup. We'll see how it pans out. But if they do play the Patriots, that'll seem very fitting, of course. However, there was one person, one member of the general media, I'd call him general sports media, even though he writes for GQ in addition to Deadspin. His name is Drew Moghery, and I appreciate his perspective. He wrote yesterday, Thursday, for GQ about how the Ryan Shazier situation has been swept under the carpet effectively by the football machine, which includes the NFL itself, which includes football media, which includes football fans. And we all know Ryan Shazier. If you do follow the Steelers at all, you know this. But if you follow football, you probably remember that Ryan Shazier was carted off the field in Cincinnati at Paul Brown Stadium last month after his headfirst tackle went awry and damaged his spinal cord. Shazier showed up at practice a couple of days ago on Wednesday at the Rooney Sports Complex on the south side and was supporting his teammates. His teammates were happy to see him, of course, so were the coaches and all the members of the Steelers staff. Shazier in a wheelchair rather, after appearing at the Steelers' final home game as well, waving a terrible towel. It's a sad sight for a player who seemed to have a very bright future in this game, a very bright present. He was coming into his own as a middle linebacker, as an inside linebacker in the Steelers' defensive scheme, maybe one of the most talented defensive players in the NFL, and was starting to add some polish to those raw tools. And now his football future is very much in doubt. Heck, his future as a fully able-bodied human is very much in doubt because of what wasn't that crazy of a football play. Like I said, it was poor tackling technique. I've talked about that on this show, but so many players have gotten away with that in the past. For whatever reason, by whatever fluke of physics, it caused a chain reaction, and it caused him to lose feeling and lose mobility in his lower body. So here we are, several weeks later, Ryan Shazier consigned to watch his team play from the sideline. And for the most part, after so many of us were sickened by the situation, so many of us were sobered by the situation, I talked about it here on this show, but as happens in life, life moves on and people move on. And I'm not saying that Shazier is forgotten. Not by any means is he forgotten. There's a special hashtag for him. There's, of course, teammate tributes, broadcast tributes. All over the map, people have talked about Ryan Shazier, people around football, and how they appreciate his fight and how they wish him the best. But, of course, football moves on. And what Drew Magary of GQ wrote about was that we shouldn't move on from this. We shouldn't allow the NFL and football in general to take a step forward and to continue on. I could see Drew's perspective there. I understand what he's talking about because this is a young man's life significantly and maybe permanently altered by this sport. And even though none of us have the right to know what's going on with him medically, that's really the domain of himself, his friends and family, and his doctors at UPMC. And I don't have a problem with him keeping those details secret. But at the same time, it does feel like we've all just passed it by and on to the excitement of the playoffs and the awarding of the Lombardi Trophy and the quest in as much for that. But I also would disagree with Drew in this way because we should not expect anyone in the football media to be keeping a hot spotlight on the NFL or the Shazier situation. As Magary wrote, some serious injuries are simply forgotten when they happen away from the public attention span. You might remember several players over the past couple of decades who were injured, were significantly injured. It was a big deal at the time, and then they move out of football. And as we've seen in lawsuits brought against the NFL and in countless other cases that we don't even know about, players are suffering in silence because of their participation in this most brutal sport that we have on this continent. At least that's what I believe it to be. But the people covering football, the people in the football media are covering football. And Ryan Shazier is a football story, no doubt about it, but he's more of a real-life story at this point as he is away from the Steelers. Yes, we'll be talking about the implications, and I've been guilty of that myself, talking more about the implications of missing Ryan Shazier as opposed to what's really going on with the human being. And so the pushback from the football media, and I'm not even in the football media, but I like to talk about sports. I like to talk about matchups and strategy, and without Shazier, that's a big deal for the Steelers and for their quest for a seventh championship, a seventh Super Bowl championship, I should say. So I'm falling into that trap, even as I rail against it right now. But the people in the football media, the full-time football media, their livelihoods depend on this sport continuing to exist as a viable entertainment entity. So self-interest is always going to be the most powerful motivating factor. I know we all consider ourselves to be altruistic, to be helpful to others, to be considerate of others, or at least most of us try to do that. And that's baked into our DNA as human beings as well. But overall, survival is number one, and livelihood is number one. And if you really want, as a sporting public, if you as a fan, just make it individual. If you as a fan want us to continue to worry about Shazier, to put questions to the NFL, to the doctors, to the Steelers, what's going on here, what's the status, can we make this game safer? That's the ultimate question. If you want to get away from the particular situation, then you have to do it yourselves. You have to continue to push that into the public sphere. And with social media being what it is, there's never been a better opportunity to do that. There's never been a situation in human history where you have more power to affect things on a grand scale because of your ability to have the bully pulpit to yourself. And I know that some people may have more followers than others. Some people may have more subscribers than others. But all of us can make a difference with a compelling enough argument. And with enough persistence, it's more possible than ever. So if you think that we should start to be more antagonistic toward football as a media conglomerate, as individual reporters and analysts, then you have to keep that in the public sphere. And I'm not talking about anthem protests. That's a totally different situation. But we did see that earlier this year, and I think we have seen at least a small drop-off in football interest by a very passionate portion of the sporting public who didn't care for NFL players bringing politics, and I put that in quotes. I call it real life in reality, but in some people's perspectives, it was about politics and bringing that into their fun and games, into the toy department of life, if you will. And so we did see how ordinary people, can make a difference in that way. So if you are as concerned about that as it appeared Drew Margery is of GQ and of Deadspin, and he made a compelling argument, you should check out that story for sure. I thought it was very affecting and a reminder that we shouldn't just move on. And even with Ryan Shazier thrust in front of us as some sort of a feel-good story, the man is still in a wheelchair, and the man may never walk again. And we have to keep that in mind. Stay sober when it comes to this thing. Don't get all high on the rah-rah nature of Shazier coming back to cheer on his teammates, even though that may be the storyline that the NFL wants you to focus on, so you don't think about the mortality and the brutality of this game and the brutality that has real-life effects on these players. So you have to lead the charge in some ways. I'm not passing the buck. I'm just speaking in realities here. Because the NFL is a golden goose. In fact, it's more than a golden goose. It's a golden flock at this point. There are several offshoots of football that keep so many people employed and keep the entertainment machine moving from that perspective. But maybe a few of those golden fowl have been shot down this year because of whether it be anthem protests or I think the Shazier situation did make a real impact, at least in the moment. However, it doesn't appear to have any kind of staying power in terms of changing people's viewing habits. It's going to take, well, I hate to say this, but it might take a death on the field for people to really turn away from football, even though a young man in Shazier, a young man with a bright future and a family man, he may have seen his future as a fully able-bodied human die on the field there at Paul Brown Stadium. I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just speaking the truth here. This could be a life-altering situation. And it looks like, in all likelihood, it will be a life-altering situation for him. So I know that's a tough ask to request for some of you on a Steelers playoff week. You just want to say, hey, isn't it great that Ryan is back and supporting his teammates and doing the best that he can? And I'm all for being positive, especially in encouraging Shazier to stay positive because, well, studies have shown that a positive mind frame can lead to better outcomes for patients trying to recover from serious injuries, from serious ailments. So I'm not minimizing that at all. However, let's keep some nuance in the argument and let's pay attention to these players who, in Shazier's case, may have to step away from football. Let's not forget about them just because they're out of the public eye. This is Gike's Got Game. It's not always this much of a downer, I promise you that. We will talk more about football. See, there I go. I'm trying to get away from the real life arguments, the real life topics that do invade upon our sports world. So that's what I try to deal with here and maybe give you a chance to deal with it as well as you listen or watch. When I come back, we'll do a pure sports argument, a couple of them, with my good friend Dan Kingerski of Pittsburgh Hockey Now. We're talking about the National Hockey League All-Star Game. The Penguins will be represented by two players, Sidney Crosby and Kris Letang. A lot of you thought it should have been Phil Kessel instead of Crosby or Letang on the team. King Gursky argued otherwise, and I'll ask him exactly why, and who knows, he might actually change my mind on the topic. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge.
Hey, it's Mike Sasson. Guess what? You used to love us at 10. You're going to love us even more at 9. It's me. It's Alex. It's funniness. It's guests. It's all sorts of me yelling into microphones only 1 hour earlier. It's exactly what you need at 9 o'clock. It's like a shot of adrenaline. It's the Mike Sasson Show, now starting at 9 o'clock on Tuesday on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
Welcome back inside Mr. Small's Theater here in beautiful Millvale, Pennsylvania. The calendar says January. It feels more like April, but if you're looking at the sports calendar, though, it definitely is the dead of winter. The Steelers host the Jaguars this weekend. The Penguins are back at it this weekend as well. 2 games at PPG Paints Arena. Red Wings tomorrow. Rangers on Sunday. Then I'm off to California as part of my role as Penguins beat reporter for DK Pittsburgh Sports. 3-game trip. Even though it just got warmer now, I know it's going to be cold again over the weekend, so I am ready to go, ready to get out there to the West Coast. And, we'll call it a work vacation because I'm going to be feeling like I'm on vacation even as I follow the hockey club around. Another guy who follows the hockey club around both metaphorically and physically is Dan Kingerski. He both writes and broadcasts for PittsburghHockeyNow.com. And Dan, who you can find on Twitter at Bud Moonshine, that's easy to remember, had an argument this week that I found rather compelling and that initially pushed me away, but then he drew me in. So he was very convincing in the argument. It's regarding the NHL All-Star Game and whether the Penguins should have had a different representation. Sidney Crosby and Kris Letang have been chosen to participate in the 3-on-3 tournament, which is what the All-Star Game is now, down in Tampa at the end of this month. Dan argued that the NHL got it right, even though many Penguins fans were upset that the team's leading scorer, Phil Kessel, and most consistent player all year, really, in Phil Kessel, was left off. So, Dan, first of all, good morning, and have you survived the pushback on social media from your argument?
Well, I'll tell you what, whenever you say anything remotely, potentially negative about Phil Kessel, one, the Penguin Mafia will get you. And two, they just tune you out immediately. So the blowback was initial, and then everyone said, nope, we're not listening anymore. Don't explain it. We're not listening. La, 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 fingers in the ears. So it was kind of fun.
So if it was that repulsive, then maybe you might have to describe it to some people who are listening now who haven't read the story. It is on, as I mentioned, Pittsburgh Hockey Now. The title is Phil Kessel Snub, but why the NHL got it right. And I understand where the NHL is coming from, so I'll throw the olive branch out there. I get how they want to have Sidney Crosby. He's only participated in 3 of these things in 12 years. Yes, there were Olympic years, but Sidney Crosby has to be in your game if he's healthy, in my opinion. The Kris Letang situation is a little bit different. They needed a defenseman, so they went with him over, say, Shane Gostisbehere of Philadelphia. But overall, you seem to subscribe more to the thought that even if you're having a good year or a great year in the case of Kessel, and you're a pretty well-known player, the superstars of the game, the real faces of the game, if you will, need to take precedent. Would you care to flesh that out?
Yeah, you kind of made my argument for me.
Oh, sorry.
By the way, when you mentioned the Ghost, there is the guy who probably got the shortest end of the stick in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
Or Jake Voracek as well. Those the Flyers got totally hosed. But if you're going to have an all-star game, Matt, the name says it, star. And Sidney Crosby is the star. Certainly, if not of the league, of the Eastern Conference. So, we'll debate McDavid or Crosby. Mm-hmm. But of the Eastern Conference, it's Sidney Crosby. So he's got to be in the game, which then the dominoes start to fall. You've got Claude Giroux, who's got 52 points this season. He deserves to be in the game. John Tavares, Taylor Hall is a bigger star in Canada than he probably is in the States, but certainly he's the star of the New Jersey Devils, so he gets in. And so this goofy format of only 11 players per division, it cost Phil Kessel, but in the end, the NHL will have a better, more interesting game because Kessel isn't there.
Now, why do you say that? Because of just the star power there, because of the potential to draw in fans? Because I would argue that Phil Kessel is a remarkable player to watch on 3-on-3 especially. That might be the best fit for his type of talent. So in some ways, I think that the league is missing out in making Kessel more of a star, more of a player that you can hang your hat on as a league if you want to promote it.
I would agree that they missed the chance to make Phil Kessel a star, but that opportunity, that moment has come and gone for Phil Kessel. He's too old now to kind of remake him on the national stage, at least without a few dominant years, and he's just not going to be a dominant player as we consider it on a team with Crosby and Malkin. So, who would you take off? I know you didn't like Josh Bailey on the team, but Matt, until last week, Bailey and Tavares were the only two keeping pace with Stamkos and Kucherov.
No, I agree with that. As far as Bailey is concerned, though, he doesn't fit your concept. So it's almost like the NHL tried to have it both ways here. Bailey is fourth in scoring, and he's long had a lot of potential in New York with the Islanders, and now it's coming to fruition here for him, and good for him. But doesn't he personify the good year instead of all-star type of a label that you've put on Phil Kessel here?
Sure, but they ran out of must-include stars. And so when you kind of draw that line of, okay, these are guys we can live without, who deserves to be here, then Bailey's in the conversation. I would have put Voracek ahead of Bailey, but that's that's a 1 point difference on the season. Mm-hmm. I like Voracek's game. It's a little nastier. It's got a little more snarl than that does Bailey. I do like my snarl in hockey, but I'm okay with it because Bailey's had such a great season to this point.
Okay, how about Kris Letang? Because we know if you watch any of the Penguins season, if you have watched it, you realize he's far from the top of his game. He has the points, though. He's just outside the top 10 in defense scoring. We're used to seeing him a little bit higher, but he seems to be coming around a little bit lately. However, he has not been anywhere near the type of all zones player that Penguins fans are used to seeing when he's going well. And for whatever reason, I don't know if Letang even knows the reason there, as he tries to come back from that significant neck surgery he had last spring. Do you think he's enough of a name to move the needle here for the NHL? Because I don't think he's not a PK Subban in terms of stars. I just don't see him as being on that top level where he's a name player that you have to include. Well,
because you and I see him so often, we probably have a more negative opinion of his season to this point than let's say, the NHL office in New York who grabs stat sheets and says, okay, what's going on? They might have seen him once or twice. They hear things. But Kris Letang's last full season in the NHL, if you take out last year, he was fourth in Norris Trophy voting. And he's constantly in that conversation for the Olympic teams or whatever it might be. So he's got maybe a bit of a mixed bag reputation, but it's still a big reputation deep inside hockey nonetheless. If you want to argue the Ghost should be there, yes, or the Islanders obviously have pretty good defensemen too that didn't get into the game. So what are you going to do? Letang has a name, and he's really good 3-on-3, whereas I don't think Nick Leddy would have been so great 3-on-3. Letang is fantastic at it. Yeah,
Kris Letang, remember 2 years ago when they first did the 3-on-3 tournament, he was dominant out there. The event was in Nashville, and he and Yevgeny Malkin were terrific there. Should Malkin be upset at all? Or is this just a fact of the matter of you only have so many spots on the Metro Division team? The Penguins have 2, and they should be happy with that.
Yeah, I don't think Malkin really – I'm sure he's disappointed. But then again, his ego. You've covered the guy now for a couple years. He's got a different kind of ego. He lets stuff like this kind of slide off his back, and then when he needs that motivation, he'll grab it and kind of throw it in the fuel tank, and off he goes. Yeah, because you only get 6 forwards, and there's, 6 teams? Or actually, there's 7. 8 in the Metro, yeah. In the Metro, yeah. I was kind of counting in my head as I said that. It's this goofy format, and I would almost, if you're going to go 3-on-3, I don't like divisional play. I'd rather see teams and maybe Eastern Conference teams and Western Conference teams. But this leaves a lot of good players at home. Well, this is a lot of talk about a game that doesn't really matter in the long term. I know we care about it because it's recognition for the players, and you and I both care about selling the sport, and that's one of the
keystone moments for the NHL over the course of the year. It's really the time of the year when people start thinking about hockey more if you're not a hardcore hockey fan, is after football gets to its conclusion or close to it. Then,
no, you're breaking my heart when you say that. You're right, but you break my heart.
Well, let's discuss the Penguins themselves, though. Actual hockey, the two-time defending champions, they had a good week or a good couple of games before the bye showed up, so maybe it was poor timing in that regard. You wrote about the Penguins' continued pursuit for a third-line center on your site on Pittsburgh Hockey Now, and I encourage our listeners to check that out. Do you think they are just a third-line center away from making another serious run? I'm starting to think that's the case. I think they're a little bit closer than maybe some of the more negative observers might believe.
Absolutely. If the Penguins did nothing else between now and the trade deadline, but added a legit third-line center, you put them in the category of Tampa Bay because their wingers are so good. Sure, Sherry is having some real struggles, and Gensel is down. Matt, I'm going to toss a grenade here in the middle of things. I'm going to say that Gensel is the trade piece that brings that legit third-line center.
Oh, wow. I like that. And why would you say that? Is it because of his underperformance this year?
Because he's the only guy they can afford to lose who has a lot of value.
Okay, yeah. Well, you have to have both, right? You have to have the ability to lose him without carving open a huge hole on your own roster, and he has to have value himself. Now, Jake Gensel shot the lights out last year. I don't think any of us, or I don't think most of us, expected him to replicate that. Have you been okay with his game this year? Do you think it's just a case of not finishing some plays, or has he been a little bit lower overall in terms of his level?
Now you're just setting me up to be mean.
Yeah, well, go for it. Hey, that's what you're all about, right? You're blunt.
Blunt, yeah. I prefer blunt to mean. No, I haven't been a big fan of Jake Gensel's game this year. Sure, he's smart, and you see him get to some space that other players wouldn't think to get to. But defensively, he's not necessarily as strong on the wall. He goes into the dirty areas, but his success rate there is not great. And defensively, he's been run over a few times. As a center, I certainly don't like his game. Watching that, we'll call it the third line, try to break out last week was genuinely painful. He would go one way, the defenseman putting the puck another way. Sherry was going a third different direction, and all that was missing is that plate spinning music. And they actually, against Carolina especially, that Gensel third line kind of led to the destruction of the Penguins' momentum and ultimately the game. So, yeah, I think the Penguins have a legit 20-goal scorer in Jake Gensel. That's what he is. 50-point guy on a great line. That's in the future. Right now, they can maybe sell what he did last season when he was just burying pucks by the bushel and get something more valuable than he might be in the future.
I have to say, it makes a lot of sense, and you can always sell on potential, can't you? And Jake Gensel certainly has that. We're not arguing against that at all. I think it's wise to at least give him a look at center, if nothing else, than to show teams that maybe you could put him there if you need to, but ultimately I like him a lot better on the wing. One last thing on your site that I wanted to get to. You dug deep into the information, so I want to give you some credit here. You dug deep into the box scores to look for a perhaps Ryan Reeves effect, if you want to call it that. And I know you've been an advocate for the addition of Ryan Reeves. I was not so bullish on that. I remain not so bullish on that. I didn't think they could have or should have given up a first-round pick for him, let alone another younger player in Oscar Sundqvist. I don't think he was that great, but neither here nor there. The trade was made at the draft, and Ryan Reeves has been in the lineup every night for the Penguins this season. You looked into it, and you saw some mixed bag results on quote-unquote violent penalties that were committed against the Penguins' top two stars this season compared to last. Were you happy with your results? Were you convinced of anything by the results there?
Well, it actually kind of took me a little aback on how few, let's call it violent penalties, Crosby and Malkin have been the recipients of or had taken against them. Malkin, to this point last year, had 7 slashing, roughing, high sticking, cross-checking calls against him. Crosby only had 3 to this point last year. And so it became an eye test thing. that the statistics really don't bear out a need for Ryan Reeves. And that took me aback a little bit. The only thing you can hang your hat on if you're looking for something to read into it is the fact that this season Malkin has only been on the receiving end of really only 2 violent penalties. And that probably has something to do with the fact that the Penguins have a 26% power play, but also the fact that teams are not trying to goad Malkin into dumb retaliation penalties because he can turn to Reeves, and Reeves just takes care of it. And that's really the only stretch you can make out of the statistics is that Malkin, not Crosby, is far more benefited by Reeves. But Reeves' play to this point has been below the line, and I think if they, and I'm the guy saying this, like snarl in hockey, I'm the guy saying to take Reeves out of the lineup and insert a more competent fourth line right wing, that the Penguins would be better off.
Would you prefer him over Carter Rowney, just in a vacuum? On right
Reeves
wing
over Rowney?
Yeah. Would you, if Rowney gets healthy, and if you assume that Sheahan stays at center there on the fourth line, Rowney over Reeves for you in a playoff game?
Yeah. In a playoff game, not against Columbus, I probably would go with Rowney. Columbus would be the exception, only because Dubinsky will be back and healthy, and he's going to test the waters. And when he dips that first toe in, the Penguins are going to have to be strong on the response.
Well, it's always a challenge to try to prove something like the deterrent effect. The Penguins believe in it, or at least some players do. I know Jim Rutherford does, or he wouldn't have picked up Ryan Reeves. Overall, might not be a great fit, and it might not really matter that much because he's not playing that much, but that also puts more of the load on other players if you're not getting a lot of minutes out of that fourth line. I have liked them better, that fourth line better, Dan, with Sheahan in the middle, so there could be some potential there in the near future. All right, Dan, thank you so much for the time, and again, for everyone listening or watching on Facebook Live, take a look at Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Dan's got a nice expanding roster there. You added a couple of players recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I added a couple of Major League veterans. We brought Shelly Anderson into the fold to join Bob Grove, and a few weeks ago I'd added John Parado, who's not necessarily a hockey-only guy, but the features, him trolling the locker room, what he got from Matt Murray a few weeks ago, and their candid conversation, where I read it a few times, and I was like, wow, that's great stuff, when Murray kind of admitted that he misses having Fleury around to lean on and some other aspects of his game. And especially in light of Murray's recent struggles, it really was, John did an amazing job. And thanks for bringing that up and promoting it as well for me.
Yeah, you got it. It's good to see Shelly back around the team, too. She wrote about Crosby and his younger line mates, Sid and the Kids 2.0, whatever you want to call it, recently. And to your point, John is a craftsman. John's a pro in this business, no matter what the sport is. It does not matter. Anyway, Dan Kingerski has joined me. You can find him on Twitter at Bud Moonshine, and again at Pittsburgh Hockey Now. And we will be speaking with him at some point in the future, I think, on this show. You can bet on that as the hockey season heats up. Coming up next on Geiks Got Game, I kill a cliche with the help of my good friend Brian Crawford standing alongside. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We shall return in just a moment.
Come on, go. It's green. Come on. Go.
God damn it, Brian. You need to calm down with the road
I'm
rage.
sick of these people, these assholes.
The road rage, man. You got to calm down on the road rage.
Well, I want to get to where we're going. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. We're going to Falling Water,
Bicycle Heaven,
the Mattress Factory,
Tuck Knob,
Trundle Manor. All right, which way do I go? Which way do I go? Come on,
right,
come on.
Right.
Too late now.
Right, come on.
Well, too late now. I got to keep going. I'm not going to sit here like some asshole.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, you're listening to The Culture Cruise. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com.
Your local Pittsburgh area museum podcast.
Yes, riversedgepgh.com, and come take a ride with us.
Welcome back inside Mr. Small's Theater. I am Matt Geica, and you are tuned into Geiks Got Game on the River's Edge, and you can find us at riversedgepgh.com. Tip of the cap, tap of the stick to Dan Kingerski for joining me on the previous segment to talk about his Phil Kessel take. Always scintillating there. It always gets people stirred up. And also where the Penguins might go from here as they try to keep it together. They've won 2 in a row, and they have a 5-day break. They're back to practice this afternoon up in Cranberry, and then back-to-back games at home this weekend. So a chance to fashion a bona fide winning streak, even though it's been a while since they last took the ice. Very exciting game, in fact, against the Bruins on Sunday night. Crowd was into it, too. It seemed like people are starting to come around on this team, starting to see some signs of life. I would agree with that as well after those last 2 games, and they've won 3 out of 4 since the new year. So there's some positivity for a team that has struggled along in their attempt at a three-peat. Anyway, time to kill the cliche, ban the cliche. I go back and forth on that title. We'll call it ban the cliche. We'll keep it less violent here in this case. I'm a pacifist by nature. This one has some real-world implications in addition to the sports world implications. As you may have seen, our President Donald Trump used a compound curse word that has many news organizations wondering whether they should print it or express it as it was expressed by the president. The word is shithole, in reference to countries that the United States should not be taking immigrants from. And I bring Brian Crawford in.
I'm here.
Host of River Talk. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
This is not a shithole, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I can be very
not
sure.
Since I
saying
moved
that.
in.
Yeah, right. You've really cleaned some things up, so I give you credit. And certainly the studio is not a shithole. How do you feel about the use of quote-unquote vulgarity? I think that's pretty mild vulgarity. I didn't feel so bad about saying it here on the show, so that's a pretty good litmus test for myself. Do people need protected from this? Because I think it's a cliche to assume. This is a more conceptual cliche here, but media tries to shield people or, I guess, be sensitive to sensibilities in this case. But in this case, with the president saying it, it's very newsworthy. So I think this is a good test for everyone. How much can we tolerate? How much cursing can we tolerate in the public sphere? What's your feeling on that?
I think people just need to grow up. It's a word.
I agree.
Like, who cares? To me, it's ludicrous, some of the rules that come down through the FCC. For example, you can say asshat on air, but you can't say asshole.
Right.
Because that refers to a body part. It's like, what are we, in grade school? There was a comedian that I had listened to once who was really upset with with America's freedom of speech issues and censorship type of things, and he was kind of outraged that they don't censor certain ideas and thoughts in the United States. And I've always felt that our censorship is very childish, but Europe's is very frightening, where they censor.
Okay.
Yeah, where they will actually censor ideas.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like you can't talk about certain things. Like, for example, like Nazis are horrible. I don't like Nazis. Nobody likes Nazis. In Germany, you're not allowed to show anything representing a Nazi. And I can understand with their history, but I'm a very big freedom of speech advocate, and I always feel the good response to bad speech is more speech. You shouldn't ban someone from speaking. You should try to educate them. And
allow someone to speak against it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I always felt that it's kind of terrifying to have a sense of censorship where you're actually limiting and censoring people's ideas, because then, for example, he called these places shitholes. If you lose that ability to speak your mind and you're censoring ideas, then maybe we couldn't come out and criticize him for calling it a shithole, because all of a sudden, he's in power and he's in the authority position, and the government then will censor. I just don't like the idea of censoring ideas. I think ours is childish and stupid. So I think theirs is, like I said, more frightening, but our sense of censorship is just like really, really stupid. And I'm sorry, it's up to the parents to decide, in my opinion. You're a parent, so maybe you have a different perspective than I do. I don't think it's the government's job to dictate what your child can and cannot watch or listen to. I think that's your responsibility as a parent, and I wouldn't want the government to do that. I like the idea that there's ratings.
Yeah.
I think that that's a guide system. Like, you can look at the movie ratings.
Oh, you mean like, PG, PG-13.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that kind of stuff, and maybe you can't get into an R-rated movie without a parent, but if your parent wants you to see it, I know as a kid growing up, there were some PG-13 movies I wasn't allowed to see, and there were some rated R movies I was allowed to see because my parents made a decision as to what they thought was appropriate for a child of my age based on the content in the movie that made it rated whatever it was.
My problem with putting special standards on words like shit or whatever else is that you give these words power that they don't deserve in this way. The George Carlin 7 dirty words, it's almost like we've taken that as gospel, as a culture. And yeah, on cable stations have their own standards, but radio stations and broadcast television stations are subject to FCC regulations, as you alluded to at the start. But I don't get why we allow these words to have these connotations and have this power over us as some sort of it's almost like a quasi-religious feel there. You can't say these words because
I think it is. Why? I think it roots back to the Puritan heritage.
But why did they have a problem with that? Why can I say poop and not shit? What's the difference? Right?
I don't. Like I said, it's so childish. It's like, do you ever watch Scrubs, the TV show? Scrubs?
Absolutely, one of my favorites. Wow.
So Elliot
right
Reed, where she would talk about the vajayjay and things
she
like
was
that.
afraid to say vagina. Yeah,
and it's so childish and stupid, and it's the same thing in radio. You're trying to have an adult conversation, and I don't even like the word heck, where you'll see like a radio personality and they'll be like heck, and it sounds like
they're holding back, right? They're not expressing
not
their
only are they holding
true
back,
selves.
it sounds lame, like they're trying to be an uncool Mr. Rogers.
Okay, I've been guilty of that too at times, saying darn instead of damn. But I think as I've gotten older, I've realized how silly all these conventions are. And to your point about censorship too, I want to get back to this as well. Here in America, we're afraid of curse words, we're afraid of sex, not afraid of violence though.
That's true.
Violence is everywhere, and then you go.
Rated G, you've got,
Right, yeah. You go overseas.
Armies.
You go overseas, and you'd be surprised at the amount of sexual content and commercials over there because they feel like violence is the thing to be most worried about, not sex, not vulgarity via language. So, in Britain, I think you'd be shocked at how many of our conventional curse words are said without even a care in the world.
Sure, and that's kind of what this comedian was alluding to. He just thought it was hypocritical that we have these censorship laws governing speech, but you can talk about any issue or you could support any issue. But I don't know. I mean, it's frightening. You've got the rise of the neo-Nazis and things like that in the last couple of years under President Donald Trump. But I don't know. Where are you going to limit free speech? And I've always been like one of those people. Okay, if you're going to tell someone like look at the human sexuality, you want to go in and tell someone that they can't love another person or they can't get married, well, then that could be turned on you at some point.
Absolutely,
It's kind of a risky area.
Well, what was that saying from World War II era from Germany? Like they came for the Jews and I said nothing. They came for the Poles and I said nothing. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. So I always think about that when it comes to the type of limiting of rights, limiting of speech, limiting of ideas.
And I've always felt that it's our responsibility as a culture to decide what's okay and what's not okay. So I'm not saying that you should allow a neo-Nazi to go out and hold a rally. I think we as a citizenry need to go out and protest that and say that we don't stand for that, not big, government. What is it? I'm trying to think of Orwell's Big Brother. You don't want Big Brother coming in and telling this group that they can't protest, can or can't protest. I think that's our job as a society and as the citizens to determine what we find acceptable in our communities.
Well, that's what I was saying in the first segment, right? I put it on football fans to keep the Ryan Shazier story in the press. You have power, believe me.
Yeah.
We listen in the media because we try to reflect your interest. And so that's the way that it goes. It's that dichotomy that I think people underestimate. They say, the media doesn't cover this, they do cover that. Why? Well, we cover certain things because they get attention, they get clicks, and they get ratings in that way. So you do have power in that way too.
Well, it's even on a simple level to tell you about, to speak to your point about power and influencing the media. I loathe memes and GIFs or GIFs or GIFs or whatever they're called.
GIFs, I'm going to go. I like GIF.
Yeah, I hate all of that stuff. But I've started doing almost every day a meme of the day from the River's Edge page because people like it. And people share it and it's bringing in engagement and then they can see the other stuff that we have going on and I can attach a really important message in to the meme. So even though I feel like a piece of like every time I do it, like a tear drops from my eye.
I feel like a drone when I share a meme. I've never shared one actually. I don't think, because it just feels like you're reappropriating someone else's idea. That's why.
That's true. And well, you can make your own memes too. But one thing
you can.
One thing I don't like about it too is my sense of humor. I don't like slapstick and stuff like that. So like I posted a meme the other day that probably most of our listeners wouldn't get, because if you're not a musician, or you can't, or even if you are a musician, if you can't sight read music, you wouldn't be able to get this meme, because not all musicians can read can read music. But it was really funny. If you know it, it's hilarious.
Okay.
So but that's, I don't know. I feel like you're kind of very low brow with that kind of thing. But like you said, if that's what the people want, then you gotta adjust.
Well, I think overall it's been fascinating to watch this media cliche play out with, how do we deal with what the president said? I'm actually happy the president said it so we could have this discussion and perhaps loosen the reins a bit and let people decide for themselves whether they want to see these words or they care about these words. And I'm sure you'll hear a lot of blowback from newspapers. I saw NPR had guidelines on what to do with shithole and how often to say it in a newscast.
I personally... I don't think it's what he said. I think it's the fact that he
It's the sentiment behind it.
Well, it's the fact that he singled out
That's what
countries.
I'm offended by the way.
Yeah.
Not the
shithole,
language.
like who cares? I mean, I've used the word shithole plenty of times, but not referring to a country where it's primarily one, race or one ethnicity.
Yeah,
It's more
or countries that are just economically disadvantaged.
You go
third world
into a bar and you see like the ceiling tiles falling down. I'm going to go in and say that's a shithole, but it's not because of who's running the bar. It's because it's falling apart.
Because it is.
But I'll be honest. When I heard the report this morning, they were being so vague that I thought he said a much worse thing.
Oh, really?
And I was
see, that's the
thinking-
problem too. You could just make it
I
seem
thought
like
he said
that
something
it's
really, really bad. I think you know what
a
I'm
whole
thinking.
different world altogether. Yeah, no doubt about it.
So when I found out what he actually
your mind
said,
can wander in certain places.
Yeah. So when I found out what he actually said, I actually was kind of like, okay, that's still uncool, but man, not nearly as bad as I was thinking, and not nearly as outrageous as what I was originally thinking. Let's just say it's a word that begins with an N, and that's what I thought he was.
Yeah, right.
saying.
Well, it's easy to have your mind go that way.
Yeah, because they're saying, because they specifically, the only direction that they gave on the report on the news when I came in was it's a word that you can't say under FCC regulations.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
I'm
right.
thinking that's where my mind went to, because they specifically mentioned African American,
Yes.
or African nations. And then they said a word that you can't say on air, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the president of the United States said that.
That would have been even worse than this. But
yeah,
that's a good point too. When you censor things, then you just allow people to fill in the blanks with their own preconceptions, and that's not good either. So I'm all for transparency. I'm all for complete truth in this case. So that's why I approve of the use of shithole.
Yeah.
As it is. Say it like I did. It's liberating, I think. Anyway, thank you, Brian. I appreciate your input.
As always.
My voice is failing me here, but I do have enough energy left to give you my favorite thing for this week. And I have I lean negative with Ban the Cliche, right? I talk about something that annoys me in media, in sports, what have you, as I just did with Brian. And it can be a productive conversation, but I want to throw some positivity into the mix too every week on Gike's Got Games. So my favorite thing for this week in sports and or media and or both actually crosses over. It's a new podcast. I know that's the last thing we need is another podcast, right? You've got enough to pay attention to. But this one's different. It's hosted by a couple of Pirates pitchers in Stephen Brault and Trevor Williams. I feel like sometimes these two guys were created in a lab for our social media enjoyment. They're very open. They have very millennial sensibilities, to be stereotypical. Very new age sensibilities, though. They share everything on social media, or they share a lot. They make you feel like maybe you're in the major leagues. Maybe you're a major league pitcher, and you can commiserate with them that way. I think, actually, a little bit cynically, it's a pretty brilliant way to market yourself as a Major League Baseball player. These guys aren't stars, so maybe if you endear yourself to the public and you make yourself more accessible, how can that hurt your personal brand? So that's what I think about sometimes too. Heck, I think about that when I share things that maybe I wouldn't have 5 or 10 years ago or thought about sharing 5 or 10 years ago, because I think that the public wants to relate to public figures more than ever before with how social media is, with how our culture is changing, and with more openness in general. in the public sphere. So I approve of that in that way. But overall, the two guys are just they're good guys. Number one, I don't feel like they're trying to put on any airs. And the podcast that they have started, the IMHO podcast, in my humble opinion, some internet shorthand for those of you who aren't familiar, it doesn't appear it's going to be really groundbreaking or overly thoughtful in some ways, but I've gotten a kick out of it, and I enjoy the personalities of those two guys. I like how they are so unassuming and seem like normal people, which a lot of athletes aren't, because fame, even low-grade fame, changes people, as I've seen and as I've experienced in life. I think we all have seen that in certain people who do change when certain circumstances change. I get the feeling that these two guys have been this way their entire life, and they will continue to be this way their entire life. So check out Stephen Brault and Trevor Williams on the IMHO podcast. That's my favorite thing for this week, and always open to suggestions for your favorite thing. It might become my favorite thing on Geiks Got Game. Thank you for listening to Geiks Got Game this week. Thank you for watching on Facebook Live as well. I am Matt Geica, and I'm reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. For Dan Kingerski, for Brian Crawford, thank you to you. I'll be back next week for another edition of the show.